Okay, so we finished step one. Okay, so we finished the first step and we found that S is equal to 14 and 6/10. So now we want to go to step two. And in step two, I'm going to put this aside. Step two, we're still going to use a form of a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay, but instead the variables that we will use for step two is going to be h squared plus s squared equals r squared. Okay, so if we go back to our original rectangular prism, then our height, okay, this is h is our height, and our height is equal to 4 centimeters. Okay, and then we found out in our first step that S is equal to 14 and 6/10 centimeters. And now because we have both our A and our B, we can now figure out what is C or what is our R, the hypotenuse. This is our C or our hypotenuse. Okay, so now we can figure out what R is. And so I want to trace what we are referring to when we say our A, B, and C. Okay, so we'll start here. So this is our, I'll do it on the inside. So this is our B. This is our A. And then we have our C or R here. Made a little faux pas, but that's okay. Okay, so there we go. So we have we know what our A is, okay, which is our height. So now we know that our height or our A is 4 centimeters, which is the same on this side of the rectangular prism. We know what our B is, so I'll put B equals. Our B is equal to S, which is 14 and 6/10 centimeters. So now we can solve for our R. Okay, so let's go ahead and write again our Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The variables that we're going to be using today for this second part of the multi-step problem is going to be h squared plus s squared equals r squared. So now this is for step two. Let me put that on here to make sure we know that this is step two. Okay, so now we can actually substitute in the values of our h, our s, and then we're going to solve for r. So h is, we can look on this side, is 4 centimeters, which is the same thing as our A. So we have 4 squared plus our S squared, okay? And so I'm going to show you two different ways. So I'm going to put a little line here, and I'm going to show you a different way to get to the same answer. But we know that our S is equal to 14 and 6/10, so we got 14 and 6/10, and we square it, and then we have equals to R squared. So let's simplify this left side of the equation. So 4 squared is 16, and then plus our 14 and 6/10 squared is 213, and we can round it to 0.2 or 2/10 is the correct terminology, and then we have R squared. So now we want to add this 16 plus 213 and 2/10, and that gives us 229 and 2/10 equals R squared. Okay, we have R squared, but we don't want R squared, we just want R. So the inverse operation of squaring a number is taking the square root. Okay, so when we take the square root of 229 and 2/10, okay, we get 15, and I'm going to kind of go over a little bit with my decimal there. It looks a little strange, but that's okay. And then we have 13803 equals R. And now we want to round to the nearest tenth, which is this 3. So all the numbers to the right of the 1 will disappear, but we need to look at 3 to see if this 1 will stay the same or if it will round up. So this 3 is 4 or less, so 1 will stay the same. So we end up with 15 and 1/10 equals R. Okay? Or the same thing as saying R equals 15 and 1/10 centimeters. Okay, so that's going to be our R. Now, before we finish, I want to show you just a little shorter way to come to the same number. Okay, so what we're going to do is, we found in step 1 that the square, or s squared is equal to 212. So if I write the Pythagorean theorem, or the version that we're using, which is h squared plus s squared equals r squared, and I still put h, for h I'm going to put 4, and I'm going to square it, plus s squared, but in step 1 we found here that s squared equal to 12. So instead of actually taking the decimal, then we're going to actually just use 212. So 4 squared plus 212 equals r squared. And then we simplify, so 16 plus 212 equals r squared. When we add these two together, then we get 228 equals r squared. And just like before, we still want r and not r squared, so we're going to take the square roots of both sides of our equation. And then we have 4r, and I'm actually going to go down a little bit more so we can get all those decimals in there. We know that the square root of r squared is just r, and then the square root of 229, it's very long, it's 15, and then we have our decimal 0.99668, and then we have a couple more numbers. I ran out of space, but since we're rounding to the nearest tenth, then it's okay for us to stop there. Okay, so we're rounding to the nearest tenth, which is where the 0 is. All the other numbers to the right will fall off because 9 is 5 or more. Then this 1 will round up to 1, so we have 15 and 1/10 equals r, or r equals 15 and 1/10 centimeters, which is what, the same as we got here. Okay, so this is just a little less work, but you should come out with the same answer. So you are able to choose whether you use this version or this version, just depending on what you're comfortable with.